Hello everyone, this is your friend Naruto Nexus 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Utakata discovered who controlled Yagura Part 3? He stared at the open book on his desk, blue eyes drinking in every detail of the picture. A splotch of blonde hair and a white trench coat was all that could be seen atop a massive toad with dark red skin. Before the human-amphibian pair was a truly gigantic fox with orange-red fur and 9 tails, its maw open wide in an imposing snarl. The creature appeared far too realistic, the artist capturing its hatred and viciousness in the sharp teeth and clawed paws of its frozen roar. A shudder shook his body at the Kyuubi's image, and he fixated on the bright colors atop the toad. That the Yondaime had faced down the 9 tails and defeated it when even just an image of it could evoke fear years later was beyond impressive. It was epic. Which was when Yondaime-sama teleported the Kyuubi outside Konoha. And kicked its ass, believe it. Naruto interjected, rising from his seat with one fist pumped into the air. Naruto. Iruka snapped, visibly irked at the interruption. Sit down. And watch your language. Quote. The blonde reluctantly took his seat amid the muffled tittering of his classmates, drowning out Iruka's voice as the teacher continued his lecture. Blue eyes returned to staring at the artist's depiction of the fight between the Kyuubi and the Yondaime. I'll be as awesome a Hokage as you one day, he thought. Just wait. LLL. Breathe in and hold it. Good. Breathe out, slowly, then do it again. Good. Keep going. In, out. Utakata walked around Naruto as the blonde obeyed his instructions, chakra keeping them both standing atop the river's surface. When you're ready, the brunette continued, voice soft and even, gather your chakra in your chest, just like you do for Kaden. Then breathe out, but picture your chakra as water, not fire. Naruto opened one eye to peer at the Kiri-nin. How will I know when I'm ready? Only you'll be able to answer that, but you should take your time. There's no rush. You know the basics of using Suiten by manipulating the shape of existing water, but this will be about changing the nature of your chakra. These are the hand seals for the Mizorepa, he said, forming them with methodical slowness for the leaf native to observe. Naruto copied the movements, focusing on memorizing the order of the seals rather than trying to immediately activate the technique, and Utakata allowed himself a small smile. At the boy's concentration, months ago, if he'd taught the blonde the same thing, there was little doubt he would have rushed into activating the wild water wave without actually learning it, and Suiten couldn't be hurried. That he'd taken all the brunette's lessons to heart was reassuring. The younger Jinchuriki's breathing was loud but even as he prepared himself to perform water-based nature manipulation. Utakata allowed the boy to focus in peace, judging his status from in front of him. Shouldn't ye be doing something? Utakata jumped slightly, whipping around to find Roshi leaning against a tree, arms crossed over his chest. The redhead was normally silent, or even absent, from Naruto's training with the brunette, finding the steps of learning Suiten too quiet and measured for his taste. Shish, he hissed, shooting a backwards glance at the blonde. When he was assured that the outburst hadn't interrupted Naruto's focus, he jumped from the river and alighted beside the Iwa Nin. Really? You're going to do this now? He needs quiet if he's going to learn this part. Roshi arched an eyebrow. I ain't talking bout, I am. Wastin' time watchin', I am and not doing nothin'. Utakata had the grace to avert his eyes in embarrassment. After bearing witness to Roshi's shifting outlook over he past several months, he felt ashamed for even questioning the Iwa Nin's intentions, even with the redhead's usual sarcasm. Ah, right, should we move to give him space? Quote. Roshi scoffed. So soft. How'd ye grow up in Kiri? Don, answer that, he said, waving a hand through the air to dismiss the answer the mist shinobi had opened his mouth to give. Oi, he shouted. Utakata and I are gonna do some trainin'. Ye good? Utakata threw another worried glance over his shoulder at Naruto, but the blonde didn't appear as if he'd even heard the Four Tails Jinchuriki. He turned back around to find Roshi smirking at him. Shut up, he told the redhead, fighting to keep the amusement from his voice. The Iwa Nin shrugged. Don, no why ye bother. No real fight goes without distractions. Trainin' like this'll keep. I am alive when a fight gets rough. He arched an eyebrow. What are ye waitin' fair? Let's see what y'ave got. You enjoy this far more than you should, Utakata replied, divesting himself of his kimono and hanging it over a tree branch. He took a deep breath and then released his hold over his chakra, allowing a green, mucus-like liquid to ooze from his pores. Across from him, heat roared to life around Roshi, forming an armor of lava that hardened into dark obsidian. I, beaten ye up don, get old. Maybe ye'll learn humility afore ye learn tear use goop skin with clothes. It's the Tokaru, muttered the teenager petulantly. He took an offensive stance, the thin film of his acid armor technique covering every inch of skin from his torso up. He charged Roshi, swiping at the older Jinchuriki with a chop of his right arm. Acid met obsidian, and the sound of sizzling stone echoed between the pair for a moment as Utakata's technique began to dissolve the redhead's defense. Strong stuff, grunted Roshi. Guess not holdin' back this time, Utakata smirked. You shouldn't have made fun of it. Even rock won't last long under a low pH. He grunted when the Iwa nin planted a solid foot in his stomach and then retracted it quickly to not let the acid linger on his obsidian armor. The brunette moved closer, twisting around his opponent's elbow strike and wrapping his arms around Roshi's neck in a stranglehold. Acid ate away at the black rock covering the redhead's neck, shoulders, and upper back, every point where the Kiri nin's skin was in contact. Another grunt, this time in annoyance. Jutsu only works if y'ave got taijutsu tear back it. Yours still sucks. A small mound of earth rose beneath the rock shinobi's feet, elevating him above the acid user and allowing him to leverage his weight, augmented by the obsidian armor, back. Ards. Utakata let out a grunt as the redhead's body pressed him into the forest floor, a breathy gasp escaping his lips as the armor's jagged edges dug into his stomach. Ye'll run out of breath afore I run out of armor. Quote. We'll see, choked out the brunette. More acid seeped from his pores, dissolving the earth around him and giving him enough room to wriggle out from beneath the older Jinchuriki. By the time he got to his feet, Roshi was already up and throwing a punch at his face, and Utakata barely got his arms up in time to block it. He let out a reflexive hiss of discomfort from being hit, the blow carrying surprisingly little force. What the hell? How are you even up right now? That armor must weigh a ton. Quote. Doden. Keihugan no Jutsu, smirked the redhead. Utakata released a sigh of exasperation. Of course he still has tricks he hasn't used yet. He couldn't tell if his annoyance was caused by not knowing whether Roshi still didn't trust him enough to tell him about the different strategies he used in battle, or because the gap in their abilities was still so vast. At this point, it seemed like Roshi was even in a league above Yagura, though without access to his Biju forms, he wondered if that was an accurate assessment. Nothing's perfect, not even my jutsu, Roshi informed him, as if reading his thoughts. Yeah, I know, though it sure seems that way. How'd I beat it then? Even as he asked the question, he was sure he wouldn't get an answer, the redhead still reluctant to divulge too much sensitive information. Instead, the Iwa nin made a shooing gesture, and Utakata complied, backing up until he was directed to stop. Try standin' like this, Roshi instructed, dropping his armor and moving his body into what the acid user assumed was an offensive position. He copied the movements, and when it seemed the older Jinchuriki was satisfied with his stance, he continued, when ye attack, make sure ye grab me like this, he advised, showing the younger Jinchuriki the correct move. Like this. Roshi nodded. Then. Sweden. Mizorapa. Utakata was blasted into a tree by a powerful jet of water, his acid armor, while diluted, slowly dissolving the bark. Sorry Utakata ni. Naruto called out, the splashing of water alerting the Kiri nin to the blonde's approach. Golden eyes opened to find the younger Jinchuriki kneeling over him, apprehension clear in his blue irises. I just kept waitin' for the right moment like you said, and then Roshi Oji kinda made this move and Quote. From nearby, loud above Naruto's anxious concern, Roshi was laughing uproariously. Ye got, I am good, kid. How'd ye like her own medicine, Naruto looked to be torn between trying not smile at his prank and nerves over the Kiri-nin's reaction, and was failing horribly at the former. Utakata absorbed the Tokaru, reactivated his protective chakra layer, and blew water droplets from his bangs, allowing an amused grin to tug at his lips. That was a good hit, Naruto. Good force and everything. Now you'll just need to practice speeding up the release. He turned his attention from the pleased Naruto to Roshi. I wasn't aware you knew how to have fun. The redhead shrugged, suddenly over his bout of amusement. He looked older again, the brief laugh lines that had crossed his features disappearing into a neutral expression. Ye keep sayin' ter let th, kid be a kid. Don, know why ye shouldn't reap th, rewards or idea. Quote. Sharp eyes flitted between the Yonbi and Kyubi Jinchuriki before Utakata clambered to his feet, got his kimono, and wrapped it around himself. Let's call it a day, Naruto. That you can use the Mizoripa is really impressive. You'll just have to remember how you felt when you did it and keep practicing. Roshi shot him a suspicious look. Making it sound like not gonna be here ter guide, I am. The Kiri-nin shook his head. I'm not. Roshi's eyebrows furrowed deeper. Naruto let out a long whine. How come? Someone's got to continue the mission, Utakata explained. There are more Jinchuriki out there, in danger, and you've come a long way in the months since we've met. I can't teach you anything more until you have a better grasp of your Suiton abilities, and I trust Roshi won't do anything drastic, he settled on. He's still got plenty to teach you, and you can practice everything I taught you in between. You'll be okay. Yeah, okay. When the Kiri-nin turned to leave, Roshi grabbed his elbow with an iron grip. In a low voice, the redhead asked, do ye really think now's right time? There will never be a right time. But now's as good a time as any. Kid ain't ready fair ye ter leave. He tossed a glance back at the glum Naruto, then returned to his low conversation with the Iwa nin. We've got to let him fly on his own at some point, right? Besides, he'll have you. I trust you to keep him alive until I get back. Roshi scoffed, though it seemed the noise lacked his old gruffness. Stupid. Utakata grinned at him. Watch your temper, he advised. Then he walked over to Naruto and ruffled the blonde's spiky locks, earning a wobbly smile in return. Don't worry, I'll be back. Just pay attention, and try not to piss Roshi off too badly. Despite his despondency, Naruto threw the brunette a smart salute. LLL. Ye keep twitchin'. Naruto flicked one eye open to peer at Roshi, wrinkling his nose in distaste. Sorry. It's still weird. So you've said, Roshi grunted, though the corner of his lips lifted in a smirk. 6 months ago, he and the blonde would have been at the other's throat in a competition of who could irritate or be irritated by the other more. Now, well, that they could both be around each other without Utakata around to run interference was a feat the older Jinchuriki would have considered impossible. In his previous life, who'd have thought an Iwa nin and Yondaimi's kid could get along? The blonde's measured breaths drew his attention. He was sitting cross-legged on the forest floor with his eyes closed, palms resting on his knees, body uncharacteristically still. It wouldn't last long. Naruto was too fidgety to take up something resembling meditation long-term, but that he could manage the brief spurts he did was impressive. The young brat he'd met had been too impetuous to manage anything close to this. Don, move, he told the younger Jinchuriki. His gruff voice was almost soothing, low enough to not disrupt the silence of the surroundings. Remember, Earth is still, unyielding. It Don, move in face nothing. Naruto inhaled, nostrils flaring, and Roshi continued, now, put chakra in dirt and make it move. Naruto's hands twisted through familiar seals, eyelids opening to reveal steely determination. Doden. Doroku Geishi. Roshi could feel the ground tremble beneath him as the Kyuubi Jinchuriki activated the Earth Release, Earth Shore Return. He waited for a slab of earth to tear itself from the dirt and become the 10-foot wall it should have, but the ground only continued to rumble. Earth'll fight yay, he lectured, voice hard. It wasn't the first time he'd said those words, but repetition tended to help the boy learn. Earth is stubborn, but ye can control it if more stubborn. Y've been practicin', fair weeks, so dig in and fight back. A low, guttural growl tore itself from the blonde's throat, a flush of exertion creeping up his neck and face. Work. Damn it, work. Doden. Doroku Geishi. Quote. The earth in front of Naruto rose slowly amidst the ground's grumbling, a 2-inch thick rectangular slab tilting away from the blonde. Seconds crawled by, but when the rumbling of the earth finally stopped, a 2-foot by 2-foot wall stood erect before him. The young Jinchuriki's breathing evened out, its ragged edges becoming smooth and easy. I did it. That ye did. Naruto craned his head and flashed the Iwa Nin a bright smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Roshi's fist came down and lightly rapped him on the back of the head. Don. Get why. Despite the reprimand, Naruto's grin remained in place. Okay. Roshi Oji. Roshi rolled his dark eyes. Lil brat, he muttered. I tall. Ye tear stop callin' me that. Naruto chose to ignore him, asking instead, you still haven't heard from Utakata ni? Another eye roll. Ye Don. Give up, da ye. How do ye think that'd happen, Quote. Naruto shrugged. I dunno. You guys are pretty sneaky, ya know. Ye Don. Get how any this works, da ye? Not really. Roshi let out a sigh that was equal parts exasperation and tired bemusement. Exhaustin'. He shook his head to disguise the sour smile that flitted across his lips. If only we were all so naive. No word from Utakata. So are you finally gonna teach me Yoden now? When you showed me before you said that I just needed to know Kaden and Doden. Quote. Come on, Oji-san, I'm ready to learn Yoden now, right? Teach me. An image of his niece floated before his eyes, and the redhead was forced to blink the vision away. He was left staring at Naruto's beseeching blue eyes and hopeful expression. So I did. But ye should probably get better afore ye try tear combine 'em, he advised dryly. One time Don, make ye a master. Learnin' takes time. Naruto pouted. Mon. First steps hardest, he offered, tone as conciliatory as he could make it. His voice still came out gruff, but the hard edge of disgust and boredom honed from too many decades of bitter solitude was smoothed down. Ye'll get it in time. Meantime, we keep movin' forward. Quote. We keep movin' forward. Roshi saw Naruto's mouth move, but he didn't hear whatever words were spoken, too caught up in what he'd said to pay attention. At some point, he'd allowed himself to become attached to Utakata and Naruto, to the team and the mission that the Kiri Nin had pitched as a far-fetched way of saving some Jinchuriki who would be an enemy in every other situation. Somewhere along the way, I had become we, and training Naruto had become important. Vital to their survival. Training the blonde made him nostalgic for the rare moments he'd shared with his niece, before he'd been dissuaded by the Tsuchikage to give up their time together. It hadn't been worth it then to give up his solitude for just a few instances of genuine affection and amusement, to risk either her future or his, and yet here he was in the same situation again, but this time the decision had been made for him by two strangers he owed nothing to. Except this time, it felt like the right one had been made. Maybe it's a sign. He cast his gaze skyward, seeking answers from a deity that had done nothing but forsake him for almost 50 years. No guidance was forthcoming, and Roshi grunted at the expected lack of response. Ye got ter make her own decisions, and fix her mistakes. Maybe part of the reason he was training Naruto was to make up for abandoning his niece when she'd asked for his help. It sounded like the kind of psycho babble Utakata would spout, but the redhead had been around the bubble user long enough to know that there may have been a ring of truth to the sentiment. And if he was making up for the mistakes of his past, there was one other he needed to address, a far, far big. Gear 1. I got tear go. Huh, I got tear help Utakata. But Utakata ni said you should keep training me. I know. Roshi snapped. At Naruto's hurt expression, he took a deep breath and then repeated more calmly, I know. He looked to the west, expression stony, one hand fiddled with the stone in his pocket, the leash that kept him tethered to the hidden rock. But I need tear take care o' something, and I need tear leave tear do it. Quote, hesitantly, before he could rethink it, he placed one strong hand on the boy's head and ruffled his blonde locks. Y'all be okay on her own. Y've been doing it fair a long time, a lil longer won't hurt ye. Quote, don't like being alone, Naruto mumbled. Utakata'll be back, Roshi reassured. I'll be back. Just keep practicing, Maybe when I come back, y'all be ready to learn Yoden proper. Naruto nodded, though he still looked downcast. Alright. Good luck, Roshi Oji. I'll need it. LLL. Konoha was quiet. Most of the time, when Naruto walked through the village, vendors hawked their wares, citizens crowded the streets, and the blonde could barely move more than 10 feet without being forced to duck his head to avoid the cowl of some person. He'd gotten used to relegating the hustle and bustle of everyday life to background noise, especially as his training with Utakata and Roshi had taken off, but there had always been a static, buzzy quality to it, nothing like the stillness currently enveloping him. Now, with them gone and no noise to speak of, a loneliness he hadn't felt in months crept back into his bones and weighed him down, turning his walk into a trudge. The two older Jinchuriki had taken him under their wings and given him the attention he desperately craved from people Roshi would saw. Why weren't worth his time? And after months of ignoring the people who had steadfastly hated him, he was forced to admit that the Iwa Nin had a point. Why did it matter what the villagers thought of him when he wasn't a part of their lives? But then he reminded himself that he wanted to be in their lives, sought to be the Hokage, their protector, and just pretending that they didn't matter wasn't going to lead him to his goal. He needed Konoha's citizens to acknowledge him, his strength, his ability, his simple presence, if he wanted to be their leader. He'd eventually stopped bringing that goal up to his companions for fear that they might eventually decide he was no longer worth their time. Roshi tended to scoff at his dream, his creased brow a reminder of his eternal skepticism. And Utakata, when he wasn't fast enough to school his features, just looked sad, as if Naruto's declaration was a painful memory despite only knowing each other for a short while. He looked like that a lot, now that Naruto thought about it, especially when asked about Yagura and how he'd gotten to be the Mizukage. The morning he'd arrived at their training area after the teenage Jinchuriki had left, a pit had settled in his stomach. It was the fear that, despite what Utakata had said, it had been the blonde's fault that someone who'd finally been willing to give him attention was gone, that someone who'd taken him seriously no longer considered him worthy. But Roshi had still been there, and if the redhead had seemed just a little more annoyed than usual, it wasn't anything Naruto had really considered uncharacteristic. Months of training together hadn't erased the Iwa Nin's tendencies to be a grumpy old man. As the days had stretched with no sign from the brunette, the idea that Utakata might not return, either by his own volition or due to other circumstances, festered, with only Roshi's unyielding drive to continue the blonde's training keeping his focus. And, fortunate or not, that was the only thing the Iwa Nin allowed his attention to fixate on. Any questions he'd had about the Rokubi Jinchuriki's whereabouts were ignored and answered with grueling physical training. That it had only taken 3 times to stop asking was an achievement all its own. But the silence of the two older Jinchuriki was suspicious. Not enough to question their motives, especially since they were too tight-lipped to say anything, but enough to know that there was something they weren't telling him. What's going on? Why won't Utakata ni and Roshi Oji let me help? He huffed in annoyance, a deep scowl settling over his features. He was part of the team, and he wanted to help, but the Iwa and Mist Nin wouldn't let him, too intent on training him to make him aware of their plan. Did they think he was too weak to be of assistance? His fists clenched in anger. I'm gonna be the next Hokage, damn it. I'll be the strongest there is. Remember, you need to stay calm. Go with the flow. Quote. Utakata's soothing voice ran through his head, and he automatically took a deep breath. His inhale was cleansing, and if he closed his eyes, he could almost feel the water of the river they trained in moving around him, a tranquil presence. Think. Utakata and Roshi had dedicated months to him, it didn't make sense for them to leave him without good reason. And the redhead had said they would both return, so he would just have to be patient. Naruto released another huff, though this one was more despondent. Patience was not exactly one of his strengths, especially without either of the older Jinchuriki there to keep him focused. But Roshi had given him a mission: persevere. Continue training. Work on the skills he and Utakata had spent arduous months beating into him, literally and figuratively. Alright, he decided, fists clenched at his sides, gotta keep working. He glanced up, looking around to see if anyone was around to witness his renewed dedication. The streets were still empty. I wonder where everyone is. Then he shrugged. Oh well. His attention wandered to the village's exterior, the treetops bunched together in an indeterminate mass. Without Roshi and Utakata, it didn't feel right to return to the spot he normally met them for training, Eve. And if that was his intention while they were gone. But Konoha's reach was far, and there were plenty of places to undertake the mission Roshi had left him. With no set destination in mind, Naruto meandered away from the Hidden Leaf's dusty streets and towards its green jungle. The trees appeared to loom overhead with serene grace, silent sentinels protecting the young Jinchuriki. A feeling of security settled over him, the slouch in his shoulders straightening, the assurance in his step growing more pronounced as he walked. It was strange to find comfort and strength in the silence, especially since he'd never particularly cared for being alone, but maybe the months of training with Roshi and Utakata among nature had been transformative. Though he didn't always agree with how the Iwa nin saw things, he still understood why the redhead thought the way he did. Loneliness was a feeling all Jinchuriki understood, or so Utakata liked to say. Naruto shook his head to rid himself of the negative feelings. None of that, he told himself, Roshi's rusty drawl echoing his thoughts. Focus on your breathing, and this time it was Utakata's voice accompanying his internal one. His lips quirked of their own accord. Imagining the two older Jinchuriki being around, guiding him through their usual motions, helped offset the loneliness. With that thought in mind, he settled himself to his task, feeling energy ebb and flow throughout his body with each breath. He pushed his chakra into the earth on each exhale, feeling the unyielding nature of the dirt beneath him and finding an anchor to keep him tethered to his training. He'd found out that learning Doden wasn't all that different from learning Suiten. Both elements were easier to manipulate from an existing source, and they both came easier to him when his mind was clear. Calm, Utakata liked to preach. Yet, despite that, they were also very different. Water was in constant motion, always moving along the path of least resistance, whereas the earth was inert. Stubborn, Roshi would grunt. Wielding either required focus, but different types, one a gentle, persistent hand to guide along a new path, the other a stubborn determination to force it to high. Will. Kinda like Utakata ni and Roshi Oji. The thought of the old Iwa nin gave him the final push he needed to activate his jutsu, fingers twisting through seals. Doden. Doroku Geishi. The earth before him grumbled, the outline of a 4-foot by 4-foot block of hardened dirt breaking free. Sweat beaded his brow as he felt the earth's shore return resist him, not ready to budge from its resting place. Move, you stupid wall, he bit out through gritted teeth, pushing more chakra into the technique and willing it to rise. The technique responded to his will, rising slowly but steadily until it stood erected before him. Naruto let out a long exhale and placed his hands on his knees, more tired by the mental exertion than the physical one. His breathing evened out within seconds, and he straightened, admiring his success with a grin. Hey, you're missing out, Roshi Oji. His personal congratulation only served to emphasize once more how alone he was, the earthen wall reminding him of his red-haired tutor. Roshi was stubborn and unmoving, a lot like the earth, but also quick-tempered and prone to outbursts, like a flame erupting from a spark. His mastery of Yoden made sense in that way, a perfect blend of the elements which matched his personality. Utakata was the same, just with water. He wondered what that said about him, someone who could use all the elements. Roshi and Utakata were both cool in their own ways, but the blonde didn't want to turn out like them. They both seemed stuck. Like they'd just accepted whatever had happened to them and grown more bitter and sad with each passing day. And for Roshi, that was a lot of days. But Naruto saw adversity as an opportunity for growth, to be better than he was, to grow stronger than the him of yesterday. That was how he would become the Hokage, by looking forward, not back. A high-pitched chirping from the nearby trees pulled the blonde from his thoughts. He'd gotten used to the sounds of nature over the months of training with the two older Jinchuriki, and nothing he'd heard sounded like the noise. Echoing through the treetops. The chirping faded away just as he figured out the direction it was coming from, and he took off at a sprint towards its source. As the foliage around him blurred into indistinct browns and greens, the sounds of battle, as familiar to him now as getting beaten by Rosh, reached his ears, a cacophony of crashes and yells. A bright burst of blue-white light from between the trees forced the blonde to squint, the shrill chirping sound from before erupting into a fever pitch. Naruto raced forward, stumbling to a halt with blue eyes wide as Uchiha Sasuke, left hand covered in a blinding aura, propelled himself towards a boy with a tan tail and a clawed hand as large as his body covering his right arm. What is that? The pair met in midair, momentum carrying them past each other to land on separate tree branches over 50 feet apart. At the same time the strange boy's clawed arm detached from his body, Sasuke collapsed forward, the blue-white light around his hand disappearing with the high pitch. Chirping. Another claw formed along the other boy's left arm, and he dove for Sasuke with a maniacal laugh. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. The tan claw spread around the boy as a protective sphere, the great fireball technique breaking apart at the contact. More of the tan substance, it shifted so fluidly, like water, but looked more like dirt, appeared, forming another claw that grabbed the nearest tree bough and allowed the boy to swing around and over, landing in a crouch. His head turned over and glared down, part of his face distorted animalistically with the tan material. Naruto felt a shiver course through him. Shit. Naruto. What are you doing here? He turned at the voice, staring up into the treetops. Sakura-chan. Uchiha. Sasuke. Sakura-chan. Get Sasuke outta here. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. Again the fireball was blocked by the tan material, and the same powerlessness Naruto had felt fighting Roshi the first couple times, when the redhead had let him try his best because he knew it would ever be enough, flooded his body. The strange boy kept moving towards his former classmates, and the blonde reached out with one hand to forestall the threat in some way. The claw reaching for his former classmates exploded, spraying small tan particles everywhere. Sand, Naruto realized as it settled in his hair and on his clothes, peppering his skin as wide blue eyes remained fixated on the boy plummeting to the ground. It's sand. Naruto, what's going on? Sakura-chan, just leave. I'll take care of this guy. The words spilled from his mouth without thought, but the second they left, he felt his resolve firm itself. This was what being a Hokage was about. I'll protect Sakura-chan and Sasuke, even though I don't know what I did. After all, he just sort of gestured toward the claw before it blew up. He stared at his hands in confusion. Maybe 'cause sand is like dirt. So I used Doden. Naruto, watch out. He looked up at Sakura's voice, finding a flurry of sand shuriken coming at him. Reflexively, he brought his arms up in a cross to shield his face from the worst of the damage, but after several seconds, opened his eyes to discover that the projectiles targeting his body had veered off course and hit the ground at his feet. The situation was uncomfortably familiar, and he realized with a jolt that his first fight with Roshi had gone much the same way, albeit with lava instead of sand. Is he? You? Growled the boy, how are you doing this? Quote, I don't know. His eyes darted upwards, finding Sakura frozen in place beside Sasuke. Mother, why are you? Yes, of course I'll kill him. I'll kill all of them for you. The boy's hands were gripping his head, eyes closed in some internal pain, and he was muttering to a person Naruto couldn't see. Then bloodshot teal eyes snapped open, a scream echoing from the sand user's mouth. More sand coalesced around him, forming an appearance more animalistic than human. A single tail, as long and thick around as a small person, coiled around him, blue vein-like markings decorating a tan body. Comprised entirely of sand, new claws formed along his arms and hands, ending in sharp black tips. He looks kinda like a raccoon. But evil. Dai. Futon. Mugen Sajin. Daitapa. Naruto flipped through seals and slammed his palms on the ground. Doden. Doroku Geishi. The earth in front of him broke free from the ground, creating a massive wall that protected him and his former classmates from the assault of wind and sand. Wow, it's huge. He stared at his hands in amazement. Did I do that? His hands curled into fists. I'm really getting stronger. It was almost a relief to be able to acknowledge it. In training, Roshi, and to a lesser extent, Utakata tended to just keep pushing without ever really letting him sit back and admire his progress. Even then, working with the two Jinchuriki was slow. Roshi didn't pull his punches, but Naruto also wasn't afraid of their fights. But faced with this boy who seemed to want to kill him, the blonde could feel his blood pounding in his ears, adrenaline coursing through his veins. And that made him feel energized. Like everything he'd learned was snapping into place. The exertion he'd felt when trying to use the Earth's shore return before was gone. From his periphery, he could see Sakura in the same spot, still staring at him in shock. Go, he yelled. Get outta. The sound of breaking earth interrupted him, and he turned just in time to see the boy rocketing towards him through his crumbling earth shore return. Naruto yelped as the full force of his opponent's clawed fist slammed into him, sending him careening into a thick trunk. Something in his left arm snapped upon impact. The claw reached out again, extending from the demonic shinobi and wrapping around his body to hold him against the tree. Pain lanced along his broken arm as the sand constraining him tightened, and he found he could only gasp in a mixture of agony and breathlessness. Not strong enough. The boy drew close, an animalistic nightmare easily twice as large as him. Naruto closed his eyes, willing himself to find calm, to find a way out of this situation he'd gotten into. No, not calm, he decided. Stubborn. I don't know how you did what you did, growled the boy, but it doesn't matter. Once I kill you, I will find Uchiha Sasuke and kill him. Sand is just earth, and earth will move if I tell it to. Let me go. Sand coiled around his legs, pulled him from the tree, and cocooned his body. I did it before. I'm not gonna die here. Let me go. I'm Uzumaki Naruto, Sabaku Q, and I'm gonna be the next Hokage, believe it. The sand surrounding him exploded outward, and his attacker was propelled back by the shockwave. Naruto landed on the ground with a hiss, broken arm hanging uselessly at his side. He could hear his kunai and shuriken clinking against each other for several seconds, as if quivering in anticipation. His right hand went to his weapon pouch to silence the metal there. Deft fingers slipped inside and wrapped around the handle of a kunai, pulling it out and holding it defensively in front of him. His opponent was gripping his head with both claws, shaking it back and forth and muttering to hymns. Elf. Naruto took a moment to glance up at where Sakura had been standing and found her and Sasuke gone. With a sigh of relief, he turned back to his opponent, wondering how he could beat him. Can I beat him? He didn't want to run away, but given his arm and the other boy's increasingly worrisome bloodlust, he wasn't sure he had any other options. I want to, yes, just to please you. Mother, let me, yes, mother, of course you can kill the Kyuubi. Naruto froze in his retreat, turning around to face the sand-covered creature. What was that? The sand around the boy's hands sloughed away to reveal human fingers which came together in the sign of the ram. Tanuki Niri no Jutsu. The Konoha native watched with wide-eyed horror as layers upon layers of sand poured forth from his opponent's body, pulling away from the raccoon-like shell surrounding him to reveal a boy his age with pale skin and hair the color of dried blood. The redhead rose under the mountain of sand, breaking through Konoha's lush canopy amidst a shrill cackle. By the time he was done growing, Naruto's neck was craned almost vertically upward, mouth agape. A truly massive tanuki towered overhead, easily several hundred feet tall, sitting on its haunches, its stout body formed from sand and marked by a design of black scribbles and dots in a seemingly random pattern. From his position on the ground, Naruto could only see dark patches where its eyes were supposed to be, though his own eyes were drawn to the single tail that arched over the creature's head, as long as its body. That's a Biju. Despite how often Roshi and Utakata mentioned that they were Jinchuriki and that they each housed one of the tailed beasts, it had never really occurred to him what that meant. After all, the Kyuubi had been bested by the Yondaime, and the only evidence the blonde had seen of it prior to meeting his two teachers had been a single drawing in a history book. But Naruto had always been so focused on the fourth Hokage in that story that the scale of what he'd been up against had never registered. I've got that thing inside me. His good hand moved to rest on his stomach. No, worse, that's the Aikibi, and I've got the Kyuubi. As if to prove his point, the tanuki's head moved, and Naruto found himself frozen by the yellow pinpricks of its eyes. Yahoo! Come on, Kyuubi, let's play. It's time I showed you who the strongest really is. Futon. Rinkuden. The Aikibi inhaled before pounding one sandy paw into its stomach, spitting out a ball of compressed air that impacted the surrounding area. Howling winds tore up a half-mile radius of forest, sending fully grown trees flying like toothpicks amidst a storm of green leaves. Naruto shielded his face with his good arm, finding stability with his back against a sturdy tree trunk, wind and debris slicing through his clothes and into exposed skin. How do I fight this thing? That he was even considering fighting the massive tanuki was insane on its own. Every instinct in his body screamed to run away, the mere presence of the one tail causing his body to vibrate in fear. Against such overwhelming might, what chance did he stand? He shook his head to rid himself of that fear. Being abandoned by Utakata and Roshi on their quest for more Jinchuriki made him feel useless. Like his months of training hadn't accomplished anything, and he was just sitting around, waiting for them to return. But Naruto wasn't patient enough to just sit on his hands, and a Jinchuriki appearing in Konoha was just too perfect. It didn't matter that he was scared, he would befriend the Jinchuriki and prove to his two teachers that he could help in their mission. Besides, he'd read the story of the Yondaime and the Kyuubi hundreds of times. If the Hokage could beat the 9 tails, then a Hokage to be could do the same against the one tail. It was the ultimate test of his future potential. Another drilling air bullet blasted through the forest, and this time, Naruto leapt out of its path. The one tail released another squeal of maniacal glee, and the blonde took to the trees, circling around the massive creature to try to get out of its line of sight. His fire ninjutsu hadn't been effective even before the Aikibi had formed, which meant that it probably wouldn't work any better now. He extended his good arm towards the tailed beast, trying to pull the sand from its body and manipulate it like he'd done earlier, but after several seconds of nothing happening, he dropped the limb with a curse. Utakata ni was right. I can't control it without training. The Kyuubi does. Come out, wherever you are. Futon. Rinkuden. More of the surrounding forest was ripped from its roots and thrown around in a maelstrom of winds that motivated Naruto to push forward, circling the tanuki's stocky body. He eyed the Aikibi's namesake, arched over its head. That's how to get close. The one-tail's shrill cackling continued as the blonde moved ever closer. Konoha's lush greenery torn asunder around him as the sand demon alternated between celebrating its freedom and screaming for the Kyuubi. Naruto thanked the gods that the Biju seemed more distracted by blindly firing at its surroundings than actually taking the time to search for him, using his good fortune to creep close enough to leap from a tree to the massive sandy tail. His feet sunk into the sand upon landing, giving him some purchase, though he windmilled his good arm for balance. Made it. Then the sand around his limbs began to shift. Shit. He looked up to see the Ikibi's head craned as far back as it could, its jagged mouth smirking at him from over its show. Elder. Hee, you can't sneak up on me. My body, my domain. Naruto dropped his good hand so it hung by his lame one, forming messy seals and focusing on the chakra in his belly. Sweden. Mizorupa. Quote. Water spewed from his mouth in a strong spray aimed down, washing away the sand that was creeping up around his ankles. Yes. He took advantage of his freedom, leaping from the tail and landing on the tanuki's rump. Immediately, more sand moved to capture him, twirling around his legs in snake-like fashion. Within seconds, it was up to his waist, his lame hand unreachable beneath silica. Oi, stupid fox. If you want to live, you better give me your power. Good hand on the sand around his legs, chakra focused on the particulates there, the sand holding him in place sloughed away. Kyuubi. Howled the Ikibi. You can't control everything. Spires of sand rose up around the blonde and then spiked towards him. Naruto tried to deflect the sand away with the Kyuubi's ability, but it continued unimpeded, and he dove away at the last second, earning a gash along his thigh despite his effort. Come on, you giant bastard, help me more than that. No response was forthcoming, not that he expected any. Temporarily free of any obstacles, he ran towards the tanuki's head, pace hindered by his new injury. A large wall of sand rose up before him, and when Naruto veered to the right, more sand formed to block his path. He expelled another wild water wave at the surrounding silica, and while the inside layer clumped together and sloughed away from the rest, more took its place. He raised a hand to again try to control it, but the sand didn't even slow. Kaden doesn't work, Doden doesn't work, even Sweden won't work anymore. Stupid Kyuubi only helps when it's convenient. I need something stronger. He only had one other trick, and despite practicing in secret after Roshi had shown him once to make up for Utakata's departure, he still hadn't gotten it to work. But he was pissed, and stubborn, and out of options. Chakra born from his anger coursed through his right arm. His left arm, broken and unmoving, gathered even more. He maneuvered his hands together just as he had for the wild water wave, focusing on his anger and stubbornness, remembering every lesson Roshi had taught him, the liquid heat that had nearly barbecued him upon their first meeting, the words the red-haired Jinchuriki had yelled at him. Yoden. Yonami. White-hot lava spewed from his lips in mimicry of the Mizorupa. It melted a hole in the wall of sand before him, and he darted through the opening with a cry of victory. A yell of rage sounded out from high above, nearly drowning out the victory his blood was thundering in his ears. Keep going, stay focused, make it to the top, he chanted to himself. He didn't know what he'd find there, but since the sand that made up the Ikibi's body had formed beneath the red-haired shinobi, it made sense that his body would be at the head. I'll kill you, Kyuubi. Not if I have anything to say about it. Using his uninjured leg, Naruto used a little extra chakra to jump into the air and avoid the claws of sand that reached out from the tanuki's back. He performed a front flip, spitting out a second lava release, lava wave at the sand threatening his life. The force of the expulsion blasted him backwards through a cloud of unformed silica until he impacted something hard with a grunt. Naruto craned his neck from one side to the other to get his bearings, noting the triangular ears on either side. I made it to the head. He almost felt like laughing, but there was no time to sit and ponder his fortune. Staying still risked death, and judging by its screams, the Ikibi was as motivated as ever to kill him. I feel you up there, Kyubi. You won't escape me. Sabaku Sotaiso Fuin. Sand swirled around the blonde, binding his arms to his sides and his legs together before he could react. The strange black markings that decorated the one-tail's body crawled along the outside of the cocoon that encased the leaf Jinchuriki. Kyubi. Naruto called, his mental voice tremoring with terror. Help me. Again there was no response, but this time, Naruto felt like he was shouting into an endless void. There was an emptiness inside that he hadn't felt throughout the fight, especially during the moments when he'd controlled sand, and that flooded him with an intense dread. He'd been relying on the fox's powers, on an ability he didn't fully understand, to help win the fight against the Aikibi, because it was important to Utakata to bring the Jinchuriki to their side, but now it seemed Roshi had been right when he'd said Naruto wasn't ready. The sand around him constricted, jostling the broken bones in his arm and forcing a protracted yell from his throat. He was in a prison up to his neck, one that kept getting tighter, squeezing the air from his lungs and keeping his body in constant agony. I'm dying, his vision swam. Sorry, Utakata ni, Roshi Oji. A flash of red and white blurred across his sight, and then a high-pitched shriek of fury made it to his ears before he blacked out, the pressure on his body slowly dissipating. Futon. Kazakiri no Jutsu. Sand solidified around him, shielding him from the zephyrs. For a brief, quiet moment, he was surrounded by darkness. Alone. Then spikes of sand lanced out from his defense, impaling, suffocating, crushing every ounce of human flesh within reach. He could feel blood soaking the silica, slacking a week-long thirst. When the sand returned to the gourd on his back, he was surrounded by the mangled corpses of 4 sand anbu, bones peeking through skin that was wrinkled from exsanguination. The street was a graveyard, his own soul dead amidst the remains of others laying around him. Moonlight illuminated the street, yet he still felt completely enshrined in darkness. LLL. Bleary blue eyes opened to clean white walls and a framed picture of purple flowers in a vase. Naruto blinked several times to try to orient himself, turning his head from right to left and spying various machines surrounding his bedside. His focus stopped on one corner of the room, where a tall man wearing a red vest over olive-colored shirt and pants was slumped against the wall, eyes close. And arms crossed over his broad chest. A forehead protector with the kanji for oil held back his wild mane of waist-length, spiky white hair. There was something vaguely familiar about him, though he was sure he would have remembered seeing someone like him before, and his mind felt too fuzzy to. Oh, focus. Oi, Ojii-san, he called, voice a rusty croak, who are you? And where am I? The older man's eyes opened and settled on the Jinchuriki. Well, look who finally decided to wake up. You're in the hospital. Brought you here myself after your fight with the Aikibi. As for who I am, he leaned off the wall and came to stand before the bed, settling into a sort of theatrical crouch with limbs splayed wide. I'm Mount Myoboku's holy toad sage, the gallant Jiraiya of the Sannin. And I'm insulted that you think I'm old. Naruto edged his head to one side. Never heard of you. What are they teaching you kids these days? Boring stuff, Naruto told him, attention roaming around the room to better get his bearings. When can I leave? Look kid, I appreciate your gumption, but you're not going anywhere. Your arm's broken, not to mention all the other scrapes you got. The Suna kid sure did a number on you. Suna kid, and this guy, Jiraiya, he'd said something about bringing him here after his fight with the eye. Chibi. His head still felt a little fuzzy, making it hard to focus on everything he was being told. Can't think straight. Where is he? Who? That kid you mentioned. From Suna. Jiraiya arched an eyebrow. Jail, obviously. He's a prisoner of war. Naruto sat fully upright, angry blue eyes focused on his fists, which were clenched around the bed sheets. Damn it. Whoa. Hold up there, kid. Jiraiya's hand pressed down on his shoulder, forcing the agitated blonde back into his bed. You're pretty energetic for someone who nearly died. You got somewhere better to be. I've gotta Get back to training. The reason came out thin, grasping for words that would make more sense than the actual reason. I wasn't strong enough, he trailed off, the weight of his loss and helplessness in the face of the sand demon a tangible thing. That, at least, was true. A sudden wave of disorientation hit him, forcing him to close his eyes. Jiraiya glanced between the downcast blonde and the closed window. Tell you what, kid. I've got a mission that'll take me out of the village for a bit. You agree to come with me, I'll spring you from this place and give you some personal training. I've got some pretty cool jutsu I can teach you. How about it? Blue eyes opened to slits and scrutinized Jiraiya. Naruto took a moment to gather his thoughts, fighting the pull of the drugs being pumped into his system, and then twitched the shoulder of his broken arm as if to bring the white hair. Man's attention to it. How can I learn jutsu if I can't use my arm? A truly magnificent shinobi won't let himself be handicapped by something so mundane, Jiraiya admonished boisterously. Soberly, he continued, but I've got a cool jutsu for you that only needs one hand to learn, if you're up for it. Really? That'd be awesome. Then he frowned. But only if the Suna kid can come, too. Jiraiya's brow furrowed. Kid, do you have any idea what you're asking? Not only is Gaara the Ikibi Jinchuriki, but he's the youngest son of the late Kage, and the linchpin of the biggest attack K. Anaha's weathered since the Kyuubi. He's also been diagnosed as a narcissist with severe sociopathic tendencies. You're talking about a textbook political POW, and an unstable one at that. Even if I could get him released, why would I ever bring him with us? Quote, you wouldn't get it. The older man leaned forward, hands gripping the bed rails. Dark eyes bored into blue, the red lines trailing from beneath them framing a mouth set in a flat line. Try me. I'm a pretty smart guy. Quote, Naruto hesitated, unsure how to respond. Jiraiya was a complete stranger, and even though he seemed kind, especially compared to the experiences he'd had with people growing up, Utakata and Roshi had told him not to say anything about them, and he wanted to keep that promise. Besides, even if he wanted to, he wasn't sure what he'd say. Utakata and Roshi had never really made him privy to their plan. All he knew was that they needed the Jinchuriki to help the Mizukage, and that meant they needed the Suna Nin. Gaara, he reminded himself. I can help him, he asserted with more confidence than he felt. Trepidation rocked his body, the lull of his medications temporarily overridden as Jiraiya continued to stare at him. There was something in the Sanin's gaze, like he was looking into the blonde's soul, reading every minuscule twitch of his face for a hint to his secrets. Naruto gulped. He knows I'm lying. Then Jiraiya threw back his head and let out a loud belly laugh. You've got guts, kid. I like that. He opened his eyes and gave the boy a wide grin. Let me see what I can do. Not only am I smart, but I'm pretty resourceful when I want to be. Okay. Oh ho, you doubt my greatness. I'll just have to prove myself then. He walked over to the window, opened it, stuck one leg out, and made sure to turn around, body crouched over the frame, to toss the blonde a devil-may-care grin. See you soon. Quote, Naruto found he could only blink as the older man disappeared from view. Then, with nothing better to do, he relaxed back against the hospital pillows and closed his eyes. What a weirdo. LLL. Gray stone walls and dank, stale air surrounded him. It was ironic, a prison in human form contained in an actual prison. Or it would have been if he actually understood irony. I am bored. It was strange that he suddenly found himself with time, or more accurately, with clarity, to consider that thought. For so long, he'd been plagued with seeking out the next victim to validate his existence, the voice in his head helping to guide him along, but now, that voice was undeniably silent. I am alone. He edged his head to the side, considering that thought. No, lonely. For someone who was used to being isolated, it was a strange feeling. The creak of metal made its way to his ears, the click-clack of wood on stone echoing within the prison's walls. A shadow fell over his cell, but he ignored it. He was used to the guard's routine of dropping off food, checking to make sure he was still alive, and then leaving. Well, aren't you a sad sight? He raised his head at the voice, finding a large man with long white hair and a red vest standing in front of his cell, arms crossed over his chest. You are not a guard. Got it in one, kid. We weren't formally introduced at our last encounter, probably something to do with the giant sand tanuki taking over your body and hijacking your conscious. Name's Jiraiya. Normally got a whole routine I do to wow the kids, but this place is kinda gloomy, and you don't seem like you're all that easy to impress, are you, Sabaku no Gara? Gara continued to stare at his visitor, expression flat and unmoving. Tough crowd, Jiraiya muttered. He took a step closer to the cell, letting his arms fall to his side. Good news, kid. I'm gonna get you out of this place. At the boy's lack of reaction, the Sanin arched an eyebrow. You don't appear too enthused. You curry no good will by freeing me. The cage does not look favorably upon useless weapons. Well, first off, the cage is dead, so his opinion means squat. He paused, as if to give Gara time to react to the news of his father's death, but if the Sanjin In was surprised, he didn't show it. Second, it's not my job to try to please Suna. If you think Konoha would let me negotiate your release for that, you're, well, I was gonna say crazy, but that seems kind of insensitive. Apt though. Gaara's stoicism remained impregnable, and Jiraiya scratched the side of his head. Or you don't care. Whatever. Naruto won't go with me unless you come along, so along you're coming. Gaara blinked. Who is Naruto? The blonde brat you fought against in the forest. A flicker of emotion finally crossed the Suna-nin's face, his pupil-less teal eyes narrowing in irritation. Aha, so you are capable of emotion. Interesting. Strange that he'd ask you to come along when you don't seem to know each other, You would trust me to accompany you and, Naruto. The name was foreign on his lips, but now that he knew it, it echoed throughout every quiet corner of his mind, a mantra that ignited a new fire in his veins. The way his mother had shrieked about killing the resilient blonde, Gaara hadn't felt that much rage and bloodlust in ages. Even his obsession with Uchiha Sasuke didn't compare. Naruto, I will kill you. Ha, hardly. I'm assuming you've figured out by now that there's something wrong with your chakra. You should know that I'm the reason for that. Chakra lit up along his fingertips, which he waved at the imprisoned boy. Nasty little sealing technique. Even works on Jinchuriki. Yeah, he continued at the slight widening of Gaara's eyes, I know all about you. So don't think you'll be able to do anything you're used to while we're together. Trust me, kid, however good you think you are, you're not as good as me. Got it. He didn't receive an answer. Not that he expected one, and continued by clapping his hands once, rubbing them together as if scheming something. So, now that we're on the same page, he grinned slightly when the Suna-nin finally acknowledged their arrangement with the barest of head nods, let's get you outta here. LLL. Alright. Naruto jolted awake, looking around the room in a mild panic. Let's go. Wah. Blue eyes finally found Jiraiya crouched outside the open window on, what's he standing on? What's going on? I've got your friend right here. Something long, pinkish red, and wet, is that a tongue? Appeared in his view, wrapped around a figure wearing an unamused expression and possessing hair the color of dried blood. It disappeared from view, and Jiraiya hopped into the hospital room. Told you I'm resourceful. So, since I did you that favor, you're comin' with now, yeah? 'Cause we got, not a whole lot of time. I guess. Jiraiya beamed. Great. He strode over to the bedridden boy and grabbed the central line in the crook of Naruto's arm. With careful fingers, he pulled it out, then began unhooking the pulse oximeter and any other lines connected to the blonde. Beeps and whines from the surrounding hospital equipment filled the room, and the Sannin quickly scooped Naruto over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. The door to the room opened, and a nurse entered. She seemed frozen at the sight before her, and Jiraiya shot her a quick glance before announcing, that's our cue. He jumped out the window amidst the nurses yelling, and from his downward-facing position, Naruto got a view of a giant toad's warty head rising up to meet him. The blonde grunted upon landing, though it was drowned out by Jiraiya's yelled, "Let's go." The toad they were on leapt away from the hospital, landing hundreds of feet away in an empty training field. Jiraiya set Naruto on his feet in the moment of stillness, but he fell over when the amphibian again jumped, bringing them into the land of fire's vast forest. The toad's tongue came up and deposited a slimy Gaara, lips turned down in annoyance, beside the blonde. "Hold on tight, kiddos," Jiraiya advised. He stood with feet splayed wide, arms crossed over his chest, waist-length white hair whipping in the wind. Naruto stared at him with a slack jaw, awed by the older man's powerful presence, a ship's captain staring out at the vast sea. "This'll be a bumpy ride." Naruto leaned back on his hands, not trusting himself to find steady footing, and winced when too much pressure was put on his broken arm. "Where are we going?" "To find the next Hokage." Quote. Why? Did something happen to Hokage Jii-san? Jiraiya angled his head so he was facing the blonde. His expression was the most somber Naruto had seen in their short interactions so far. The Sandaime was killed during the Tsunaoto invasion. Shock pulsed through Naruto's body, his mind suddenly blank at the revelation. It must have been visible on his face, for the Sannin turned to face forward again to avoid looking at him. "I'm sorry you had to find out like this. The hospital's been short-staffed and overworked since the invasion, and some of the higher-ups thought it prudent to keep you under sedation because of the QB." Unable to process all the information, Naruto latched on to the last thing Jiraiya had said, asking in a strained voice, "The QB?" Quote. "People fear what they don't understand, kid. Fear leads to stupid, often irrational, decisions. And the QB, well, I'm sure you already know all about that. You and your friend there." Naruto looked at the redhead, as if suddenly remembering he was there. Gaara stared back, expression intense yet unreadable. There seemed to be no soul in his gaze, and he forced himself to turn back to the Sannin. What? There were too many questions in his mind. Questions about the Sandaime, about the invasion, their mission, Gaara, that he couldn't focus on editing out any of them. "New Hokage's name is Tsunade," Jiraiya announced. He seemed to have realized Naruto's state and was trying to answer as many of the boys' unspoken questions as possible. "We used to be teammates, but she's retired now." Quote. The singular line of thought broke through his haze, and Naruto asked, "Retired? Then how's she gonna be Hokage?" Jiraiya tossed him a grin. "I've got a plan. Don't worry, she'll come back. Mark my words." Quote. They fell silent as the toad continued to leap through the land of fire, both consumed with their thoughts. Emotionless teal eyes flickered between the blonde boy and the white-haired man's back, studying them. Gaara flexed his hand, trying to summon a trace amount of sand from his gourd. No particulates responded, and the corners of his lips turned down in an unnoticed frown. LLL. You said you had a cool jutsu I could learn with one hand. Quote. So I did, Jiraiya agreed. The trio, their toad escort had been released back to wherever it came from, were settled in a clearing deep within the land of fire, the late afternoon sun filtering through the treetops. Naruto fidgeted while watching Jiraiya, enjoying the combination of warmth tempered by a slight breeze even as he waited for the older man's instruction. Watch this. He held out his hand, and after a moment, a sphere of swirling chakra the size of a large orange formed in his palm. The blue of Jiraiya's chakra matched the blue of Naruto's wide eyes as he stared in amazement at the technique. The Rasengan, announced the Sannin. Recognize it? Naruto shook his head. Honestly, what are they teaching you kids these days? This is one of the Yondaime's signature jutsu. Cool. What's it do? Instead of responding, Jiraiya walked over to a nearby tree and thrust the Rasengan into it. The crunch of splintering bark filled the area, followed by the creak of the falling foliage. Once the tree was grounded, the Sannin turned to the blonde and said, "That's as good as you'll get, unless you want to volunteer to experience it firsthand. Naruto shook his head in rigorous denial, though his eyes remained enthusiastically bright. Jiraiya tossed the boy a water balloon. Start with this. What do I do with it? Pop it, obviously. Use your chakra. Don't get discouraged if you don't get it right away. It took the Yondaime 3 years to create the Rasengan, and it took me months to learn it using this method. He waved a lazy hand through the air as he walked in the direction of the village they'd seen before settling down. I'll check in on your progress later. Gonna go do some reconnaissance in the meantime. Have fun. He disappeared in a swirl of leaves, and the Jinchuriki was left shouting to no one, months. Naruto grumbled into the open air when it became apparent that Jiraiya could no longer hear him, nonsensical mutterings that only served to vent his annoyance. It was a habit he'd picked up from Roshi, who'd often taken to grousing to himself, especially when Utakata tried a gentler approach during the earlier days of their training, and mimicking it eased the sudden resurgence of abandonment he felt. Breathing deeply to soothe his irritation, just as Utakata had taught him, he focused on the task at hand. Thinking of the older Jinchuriki reminded him that he'd undergone months of training to get to where he was currently, and neither demon container had yet officially begun training him in their respective Biju powers. If he could hold out for that, then he could do the same for learning the Rasengan. In, out, there's water inside, he murmured, his chakra probing the balloon. Using the lessons Utakata had taught him, he manipulated the water's shape, swirling it around within the confines of the balloon. It's easier like this. Water was normally so untamable, especially since he was used to practicing with the unyielding flow of the river, that concentrating enough to perform fine manipulations like the Kiri Nin could was a struggle. Here, with only a small amount of water stuck in an unmoving, unchanging package, focusing was easy. Water swirled within the balloon, an unseen vortex that caused the whole thing to shake in his palm. His tongue poked out between his lips, brow furrowing in concentration. Come on, he worked his chakra in the water, forcing it into a tumultuous maelstrom. Seconds later, the balloon exploded from the internal pressure, soaking Naruto's face with water. Ha! Yes, you accomplished that quickly. Naruto jumped, head whipping around to find Gaara standing not 10 feet away. The redhead was so quiet that the blonde kept forgetting he was on the mission, especially since Jiraiya almost effortlessly pulled all attention to himself. Yeah, thanks. Awkwardness filled the silence, and the leaf native suddenly became aware of how strange it was to be in such close proximity to someone who, upon last recollection, had been seconds away from killing him. So, how are you doing? Teal eyes continued to stare at him. Naruto repressed a shiver, finding nothing in the other boy's expression except the cold, uncaring promise of death. Why do you care? He finally asked, tone as dry as the desert he hailed from. Because, we're the same, you know. Naruto turned his gaze away from the redhead, unable to maintain eye contact any longer, and instead focused on fiddling with the broken pieces of rubber remaining in his hand. You're a Jinchuriki, I'm a Jinchuriki, he trailed off, suddenly aware that he knew nothing else about the redhead. With a tinge of hope in his voice, he asked, isn't that enough? No. His tone left no room for argument. I am alone, a product of darkness. Just me, and mother. His brow furrowed, and he stared at his hands, turning them over to examine both sides, flexing fingers keeping his attention. And now it is just me. Tiny particulates of sand hovered around his fingers. There is nothing in caring for others, and in killing you, I will prove my existence. You're wrong. Naruto clenched his trembling fists and held them rigidly at his side. Everything I've learned, I learned from people I care about. They're Jinchuriki just like us, and they're the reason I was able to beat you. Why I can do this? He held out his hand, gesturing to the broken balloon. They care about me, they're the most important people in my life. Gaara was his head with both hands. He shook it back and forth, seemingly caught in the throes of some personal nightmare. Shut up, he growled. Caring causes weakness. I will be strong. I will kill you. Naruto thought of his life, how alone he'd felt before Utakata and Roshi had discovered him and taken him under their wings. The crippling loneliness, the lack of anyone to push him towards his dream, it was easy to see how Gaara had turned out the way he had. Roshi hadn't been all that different at the beginning. Did Roshi Oji and Utakata ni feel like that? You're wrong, he told Gaara, conviction strong in his voice, and I'll prove it to you. Quote. He held out his hand for Gaara to shake, hoping the other boy would bridge the gap and take it, a show of camaraderie. The redhead stared at the proffered appendage for a long moment, scrutinizing it, and then turned and walked away from the blonde. Naruto watched him go, a forlorn expression crossing his features. Maybe next time. LLL. Gaara watched from his seated position on the ground as Naruto struggled with the task he'd been given. Jiraiya had been visibly shocked to discover the blonde's success with the water balloon when he'd RNED after his reconnaissance, though he'd quickly schooled his features and tossed his pupil a rubber ball with instructions to pop it and a warning that it would be much harder than the balloon. That had been a week ago, and Naruto's frustration was apparent. I understand your pain. His hands paused in their movements as he considered the thought, his practice interrupted. The cloud of sand particles floating in the air around him fell to the ground, free of his influence, and he frowned at his lapse. While Naruto was dealing with trying to break the rubber ball, the Sunanin's free time was spent trying to regain the control of his sand that Jiraiya's seal had apparently shut down. The process was arduous, painfully so, but over the hours and days of travel and training, his power had slowly surely returned. It was fractional, nowhere near what he was used to, but it was coming back. For once in his life, Gaara was struggling, and in watching, observing, studying Naruto's plight, he felt kinship. Strange. The last time he'd felt anything close to this was in his meetings with Uchiha Sasuke, but there the connection had been emotionless. In Sasuke, he'd seen only the same desire to prove himself, to be the best by destroying the opposition. But now Gaara was as powerless as he'd ever been, neutered by the meddlesome Jiraiya, and watching someone he'd marked for death struggle against the odds was invigorating. He waited for the call in his mind, the voice of Mother, excitedly urging him to relish in the thrill of his victim's futility. But it never came, and the redhead was once again reminded of how alone he was. For years, he'd listened to Mother's voice, ranging from whispers to shrieks, and because of that, he'd never noticed the solitude. And before her, he'd had Yoshimaru. Gaara gripped his head with both hands, teal eyes closing to shut out the images that flashed before them. His uncle's kind, violet eyes and sad smile invaded the darkness behind his eyelids, the memory of the man's voice echoing in his head. There is only one thing that can stop such heartache. As inconvenient as it may seem, this cure can only be given by people other than yourself. What is it? It's love. Shut up, he whispered. A hand landed on his shoulder. Hey, are you okay? Teal eyes snapped open, and Gaara threw out a hand that smacked a tan arm away, rasping in a panicked voice, go away. A small ball of sand formed between them and then burst, specks of grit striking Naruto's chest. The force was just enough to push the blonde away but not injure him. Gaara stared at the spot where the other Jinchuriki's hand had been, unable to appreciate the small display of control over his abilities. You touched me. Well, yeah, you looked like you were in pain. Pain. He held a hand to his heart. Although it doesn't bleed, this part hurts so much. Bodies bleed upon physical injuries, and they may look quite painful, but eventually, the pain will wear off as time passes, and they can heal faster with medical aids. What are more serious or emotional scars? They are the hardest to heal. Emotional scars. Physical and emotional scars are a bit different. Unlike physical ones, there's no ointment available for emotional ones, and pain may never go away. No one had touched him since that day, since Yoshimaru had taught him about pain and love and then ripped that all away in a single instance of vengeful fire. The sand armor that protected him, and his thirst for death, made it so that no one tried. That someone had, some strange boy he'd sworn to kill, was anomalous. Inexplicable. I do not feel pain, he said, voice robotic, gaze cast into the distance. I feel nothing but love only for myself, and hatred for others. Quote, that sounds sad. Gaara turned his head away, unable to continue keeping the blonde with the empathetic blue eyes in his field of vision. It is. You know, you don't have to be alone. Naruto's voice was quiet, somber. I know people like you, like us, we were sad, too. But now that we have each other, we're happy. Well, happier, anyway. Caring about other people and having people that care about you is a good thing. Quote, Gaara closed his eyes again in an attempt to block out the understanding in the other boy's voice. Shut up and leave me alone. If you're sure, I'm here if you want to talk, though. Naruto turned and began to walk away, but then he snapped his fingers and rushed back to the redhead. Hey, how do you do that sandball thing? Can you show me? The redhead turned a confused expression to the blonde. Sand, ball, yeah, you know, he moved his good hand so it was close to the broken one held in place by a sling at chest level, then quickly pulled them apart and imitated an explosion. Po, that thing you just did. Stunned by the request, by the idea that he'd somehow made more progress with regaining his sand manipulation while in a fit of madness than during a week of focused practice, the Sunanin lifted his hand and summoned sand to his palm. A ball of silica slowly formed until it was roughly the size of an apple. He stared at it for a long moment, brow furrowed, and in his mind's eye, he pictured the sphere exploding. The sand ball obeyed, bursting outwards in every direction. Naruto's gaze flickered from the redhead's now empty palm to the particulates falling to the ground. You can make it go in all directions at once, he muttered. Like how Utakata does, but he uses water. And you use sand. Here it's just air. I can't do anything with air. Can I just use chakra? Jiraiya used chakra, so it's gotta be possible. Gaara watched as the Kyuubi Jinchuriki walked away, mumbling to himself all the while. He also talks to himself. And for the second time that day, he felt kinship with the blonde. LLL. RRRR. Damn it. Your persistence is impressive. Like you're one to talk, Jiraiya interjected, practicing your sand jutsu day in and day out. Where's it gotten you? Gaara scowled at the older man, reaching out towards him with one hand. A small stream of sand flowed out of the gourd of his back and reached for the Sannin. Jiraiya swatted away the attempted assault and laughed. Well, aren't we cheeky today? Then he grew serious. But see what continued practice gets you. The redhead turned away from the older man and instead focused on the hustle and bustle of Tanzaku-gai in an effort to ignore him. People were everywhere, hawking street food and wares, talking to one another, flowing in and out of different establishments, and Gaara found it all to be too much. While not the size of the hidden sand, it certainly felt more crowded, doubly so from the street itself as opposed to an open rooftop. Where his reputation guaranteed him solitude and, more importantly, space. With only limited control over his sand and mother's whisperings absent in his mind, the sand genin felt more on edge than usual, uncomfortable in a confined space with no way to escape or create his own path out. Hey! Gaara twitched, startled by the voice, and swiveled to find Naruto walking beside him. Are you doing okay? You don't look so good. He stared at the blonde, teal meeting blue, neither breaking eye contact. Discomfort roiled in the Sunanin's gut at Naruto's concerned gaze. He hadn't seen someone look at him with such care since Yashimaru. Most other people would have backed down or averted their eyes when confronted by his intense stare, but this boy, his strength of will was beyond what Gaara was used to. He turned away from the blonde, fixing his sight straight ahead and muttering, "People, there are too many people." As he spoke, he realized his hands were shaking, the quivering feeling in his gut spreading throughout the rest of his body. I cannot. No control. Jiraiya. But the Sannin had already turned and grabbed the red-haired Jinchuriki, throwing him over his shoulder and leaping to the nearest rooftop. When the Sannin's actions registered, Naruto followed him, finding the older man setting Gaara down and then stepping off. He threw out a hand when Naruto landed. Stay back, kid, give him some room. What? He's having a panic attack, Jiraiya explained, voice quiet but hurried. He's grown up in isolation most of his life, this place might be too much for him. And let me tell you, kid, the last thing we need is him losing control in the middle of the town. We need to help him. Even sealed, it's dangerous to get near an unstable Jinchuriki, Naruto. The blonde was creeping closer to the Sunanin, every step wary of the sand that was rising around the redhead in protective strips. It did nothing but float in the air as Gaara trembled in place, muttering to himself. Naruto rushed the last several steps towards the other boy and placed both hands upon his shoulders, wincing as his injured arm protested the motion. Gaara's wild eyes rooted him in place, and Naruto swallowed hard, realizing that he'd once again stepped into a situation with the Ikibi Jinchuriki that he was sorely prepared for. Gaara, you need to calm down. I know, he licked dry lips, pushing through the fear and forcing himself to continue. I know what it's like to be beaten down by people. They don't get people like us, and that sucks, but you can get through this. 'Cause there are people who we can be around, other Jinchuriki, people like you and me, people who make life worth it. You don't always have to be scared of people, trust me. But you gotta calm down. Please. Quote. Slowly, Gaara's breathing evened out, his eyes returned to their normal, flat gaze, and the sand floating in the air around him lost cohesion and dropped to the ground. Naruto let his arms fall to his sides, sliding his wounded arm back into its sling as the redhead rose to his feet. Gaara shot him a brief glance and exhaled a quiet, unsure, thank you. Naruto smiled at him, suddenly hopeful. You're welcome. Damn, kid, Jiraiya exclaimed, you've got balls of steel. Maybe not a lot of brains, but balls for sure. Quote. Thanks. Why don't you two stay here for a bit, The Sannin suggested. So long as you promise to play nice, anyway. You haven't killed each other so far, so I think it'll be okay. He glanced between the pair. Right. Yeah, we'll be okay. Jiraiya nodded. Then I leave you to it. I'll be back soon. And then he was gone. Naruto glanced around as the smoke from Jiraiya's shunshin dissipated, finding Gaara standing at the roof's ledge and looking down at the city below. He approached the redhead and stood beside him at a respectable distance, shooting the other boy a quick side eye. You're, not gonna jump or anything, right? No, came the flat reply. He turned to grace the blonde with the full brunt of his dead-eyed stare. What do you want from me? What? You are present, constantly. You remind me of someone who cared. He frowned, the concept of caring utterly foreign. Caring is for people who love each other, but I tried to kill you. Your death would prove my existence, yet, he turned back to the street below, unwilling to finish the thought. You do not make sense to me. You can care about anyone. Naruto protested. Family. Friends. I have no friends. I'm your friend. He fought the urge to wither under Gaara's unblinking stoicism, instead meeting the redhead's teal eyes with his jaw set at a stubborn angle. Listen to me, damn it. Maybe all that crap is true. Maybe you do suck at caring and, yeah, you tried to kill me, but that doesn't matter. That's all in the past. We've gotta look out for each other now. And in the future. Because I care about you, and you're my friend, and that's what friends do, believe it. Quote. Gaara didn't respond in the face of the blonde's tirade, staring at the other boy unblinkingly. Finally, he said, you know nothing about me. You're a Jinchuriki, like me, Naruto asserted. That's all I need to know. Quote. Gaara let out a snort and returned his gaze to the hustle of Tanzaku guy below, finding he had nothing to say in response to the blonde's optimistic authority. LLL. Come on, come on. Naruto focused intently on the rubber ball in his hand as it swelled and bulged under the influence of his chalk. He poured more energy into the sphere, willing it to move in every direction imaginable, until it finally exploded with a violent burst of air. Hell yeah. Taking deep breaths to calm himself from his victory, the blonde glanced over at Gaara to see if the redhead had any reaction to his success. The Suna Nin seemed content to remain where he was, staring out over the town from their rooftop vantage point. He sighed at the lack of response, wishing not for the first time that Utakata was around to offer his usual dose of measured praise. The day after Gaara's panic attack, Jiraiya had deemed it best for them to remain behind while he continued to work on persuading Tsunade, whom he'd apparently found, to take up the mantle of Hokage. In turn, Gaara had opted to spend most of his time outside the claustrophobic hotel room, taking U.P. station on the roof where he could watch the city in stoic silence. It wasn't all that different from how the past several weeks had gone, except now Naruto kept catching the redhead staring at him. The looks were odd. Naruto didn't feel like Gaara was seeing him as a piece of meat anymore, but what he did see, the blonde couldn't say. The Suna Nin was harder to read than Roshi, albeit trading the Iwa Nin's grumpiness for sheer apathy. Jiraiya has returned. Really? Naruto bounded over to his fellow Jinchuriki, peering down over the roof's ledge to spy the older man's white hair on the street below. He's back early. He jumped down to greet his mentor, yelling, "Jiraiya, I did it." Hey, you don't look so good. Tsunade, Jiraiya grunted. Damn stubborn woman drugged me. She's gonna do something stupid. Come on, I know where she's staying. Naruto nodded feverishly, Jiraiya's tone conveying the urgency of the situation. Gotcha. Hey Gaara, let's go. He looked up to see if the Suna Nin would acknowledge him, receiving a curt head bob in reply. Naruto grinned, following behind Jiraiya with a skip in his step that appeared contrary to the older man's doddering trudge. As the Sannin led him through the city, Naruto shot periodic glances at the rooftops, making sure that Gaara was still following along. Each flash of short blood-red hair caused his grin to grow. I think he's coming around. Jiraiya halted in front of a 5-story hotel that appeared unremarkable compared to the others around it. 3rd floor, 2nd window. They leapt up to the balcony, and the Sannin let out a curse as he looked through the glass. Damn it, Tsunade. He pounded one fist against the glass and yelled, Shizune. A woman with short, dark hair began to stir from her prone position on the carpeted floor. Naruto watched her rise slowly, bringing a hand up to cradle her head. When she finally looked in their direction, she blinked twice, then asked, Jiraiya-sama. Let us in, Shizune. The woman hurried to obey, unlocking the door and letting the pair inside the room. Where's Tsunade? Shizune shook her head. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. She went to see Orochimaru, Jiraiya finished. At Shizune's surprised expression, the Sannin waved away her shock. Yeah, I know about that. Former teammates, I kinda know how he thinks. And how Tsunade thinks. What I don't know is the specifics, or where she is. I can take you to her. Great. But first, can you heal me? Tsunade drugged me, and it's affecting my chakra and motor skills. And since I might be fighting both Orochimaru and Tsunade, I need to be in peak condition. I'm sorry, Jiraiya-sama, but I can't. Tsunade-sama's the only one with the skills to reverse the effects of her poisons. Damn it. He glanced down at Naruto, who was scrutinizing Shizune with a critical eye, trying to follow a conversation he didn't understand. Can you fix the kid's arm then? I have a feeling I'm gonna need all the help I can get. Shizune hesitated, dark eyes flashing towards the surprised blonde. Yes, but, is it wise to bring someone so young into this fight? No, but I don't seem to have any better options. And it's gonna get worse, he muttered while Shizune knelt down and applied healing chakra to the blonde's arm, the pair introducing themselves to each other. Gaara, he shouted. Get in here. The Suna Nin alighted soundlessly on the balcony, staring at the older man with arms crossed over his chest. I don't trust you, and you don't trust me. But right now, I need your strength. I can't unseal you, but I've been watching you. Your chakra is still there, and so is your power. You can control it if you put your mind to it. In spite of everything, I'm hoping that you're willing to use that power to help me. So, please help me. Naruto's gaze was fixated on the redhead as he digested Jiraiya's plea. This was the ultimate test of whether the Sunanin had really absorbed any of the words he'd tried to impart over the last month. That he'd listened to the Sannin at all was a drastic improvement. After a long period of silence, Gaara finally asked, "Can I kill them?" Jiraiya smirked. "You're welcome to try. Then I accept." "Great. Shizune, is the kid ready?" "Yes, Jiraiya-sama." "Then let's go." Jiraiya jumped out the window and was followed by Shizune, Naruto, and then Gaara. The two Jinchuriki stayed together behind the older pair as they leapt from one rooftop to the next, Shizune overtaking the Sannin in order to lead the quartet. Naruto ignored the pair's conversation, choosing instead to shoot curious glances at the Sunanin while flexing his hand and rotating his now healed arm. "Feels good as new." Blue eyes flickered to Shizune's back. "Medical shinobi are awesome." He shot another look at Gaara before asking, "How come you decided to help?" "Killing strong people verifies my existence," intoned the redhead. "If Jiraiya feels he needs help to combat this threat, then the enemy must be worthwhile." Quote, "Oh, did you expect a different response?" "I dunno. I thought maybe you thought about what I've been saying." Gaara's teal eyes locked with his in a dull stare. "Your words are meaningless. Your words are meaningless." Naruto shouted in frustration. "Life's hard, but it won't get better unless you try. Try. Damn it, Naruto." Jiraiya snapped. His head was turned to face the pair of Jinchuriki, attracted by the blonde's raised voice. "Now's not the time. I need both of you at the top of your game right now, which means no distractions." Naruto lapsed into silence at the reprimand, a flush of shame and anger coloring his face. With his words apparently taking effect, the Sannin added in a sober voice, "And you should realize that some people just can't change." The quartet was silent after that, each member consumed by his or her own thoughts, until they reached an older section of town partitioned by stone walls. Naruto gaped at the destruction that greeted them, pieces of rubble from broken wall segments strewn about the area. Scattered craters and fissures scarred the ground. "What?" Jiraiya whistled. "Damn, something pissed Tsunade Hime off, that's for sure." "Do you think she refused Orochimaru then?" Shizune asked, voice hopeful. "Your guess is as good as mine. Either way, it's even more imperative that we find her, and fast." "Where would they have gone?" "I don't." "Oh, Taunton." The small pig Shizune had been carrying around jumped out of her arms with a squeal and sniffed at a green haori with the kanji for gamble imprint D in a red circle that was on the ground. "She." Naruto guessed by the pearl necklace. Why does a pig need a necklace? He wondered, made another sound and gestured to the north. "Seems like we have a heading," Jiraiya said. "Lead the way." They took off again, Shizune grabbing Taunton and leading them by the gestures and squeals the pig made. Taunton's nose led them to a field of grass on the outskirts of town, sparse rocks decorating the landscape. Moving around the area trading and evading blows were an ample-bosomed woman with blonde hair and a gray-haired male clad in dark purple. Observing them from a distance was a tall, lithe figure with straight, waist-length dark hair. "This is better than I expected," Jiraiya commented. "We need to help her." Shizune's voice held a lilt of panic, a register Naruto vaguely recognized from when Utakata started to freak out about something Yagura related. "Agreed. And we need to go now," Jiraiya added, disappearing from view as the gray-haired shinobi was preparing to impale an immobile Tsunade with a kunai. Shizune and the two Jinchuriki performed their own body flickers, appearing in the midst of a cloud of smoke created by Jiraiya. When the haze cleared, the point of the kunai was embedded in a small shield of sand that had formed in front of Tsunade. The gray-haired male let out a noise of detached curiosity. Well, this is a new development." Sand slithered up the kunai and attempted to engulf his arm, but he jumped backwards before it could get a grip. "Oh Gaara-kun, you're so eager." Three heads turned to look at the Sunanin. "Gaara, you know this guy?" Naruto asked. "No." "Ah, Gara-kun, your memory is so short, lamented the older shinobi. We were just in the Chunin exams together. Gaara's expression remained unchanged. I am only interested in killing the strong to prove my existence. You must therefore be weak. The gray-haired shinobi tilted his head down so that the sunlight flashed against his glasses, momentarily hiding his eyes. Is that what you think? Move. Jiraiya shouted, grabbing Tsunade and backpedaling with Shizune. Naruto was so startled by the command that he wasn't able to react in time, and he stood transfixed as the older male closed the distance between himself and Gaara in the blink of an eye, slamming a palm coated in blue chakra into the redhead's shoulder. Right where Uchiha Sasuke's hand had pierced his skin a month ago. Gaara screamed as his muscles, ligaments, and nerves were shredded by medical chakra. Sand exploded from the gourd on his back and forced his assailant away. Pain, he shrieked. Mother, why is there pain? Oh, Gaara-kun, sibilated the pale man, watching from afar. His voice was smooth and silky, a touch of venomous sadism tinging every word. You've never known what it's like to be hurt until now. First Sasuke-kun, now Kabuto, how the mighty have fallen. Orochimaru, you son of a bitch. Jiraiya shouted. Is this all a game to you? Trying to manipulate an insane Jinchuriki to enact your machinations? Quote, Jiraiya, you always think so small. Do you even know what my plans are? I imagine it has something to do with destroying Konoha. You're not exactly original. In any case, I'm not giving you a chance to pull off whatever you're scheming. Shizune, see if you can get Tsunade functional. Naruto, deal with Gaara, then focus on protecting Tsunade. The Sanin's voice carried an authority that the blonde couldn't ignore, so he merely nodded his understanding. Jiraiya, you'll fail to protect everyone just as you've failed at everything else, Orochimaru hissed. Kabuto, remove the bandages. Jiraiya rushed forward to engage his old teammate, but the gray-haired shinobi swiped a streak of blood along Orochimaru's arm and summoned two huge snakes that read his path. One of them dove for the Sanin with jaws open wide while the second targeted the remaining quartet, Kabuto atop its head. Naruto's head swiveled between the pair of women and the screaming Gaara. I can't protect all of them. What do I do? His hands flipped through seals before his mind could truly process his train of thought. Roiling chakra built in his chest and shot from his lips in a burst of flames. Kabuto jumped off his perch and landed near where Shizune and Tsunade were before the great fireball struck the massive serpent's head. The snake let out a long hiss of pain and thrashed wildly, blinded by the conflagration. Naruto took the moment of distraction to run over to Gaara. Hesitation caused him pause at the sand floating around the redhead in sporadic patterns, but just as he'd done during the other boy's panic attack, he pushed it down and warily stepped through the silica. It didn't react to his presence. Maybe that's a good sign. Gaara, he yelled over the boy's screams. You need to calm down. I need your help. Pain, he shrieked. Mother, why do I feel this pain again? Exclamation mark quote. It was almost instinctive at this point for him to place his hands upon the Sunanin's shoulders, taking care to be gentle with the one Kabuto had injured. Gaara twitched violently, wild teal eyes focusing on the blonde. Injuries can be healed, Naruto told him, making sure the other Jinchuriki heard him. Shizune healed me, she can heal you, too. You don't have to be in pain anymore, but you need to let me help you. I want to help you. Quote. Gaara continued to stare at him, but he'd finally stopped screaming and now seemed to be absorbing the blonde's words with a rapt attention that had been absent in their previous interactions. Naruto could hear the seconds tick by in his head, each one as loud as a drumbeat, and when enough time had passed that he felt he couldn't wait any longer, he positioned himself beside the Sunanin and threw the boy's good arm over his shoulder. To his surprise, the redhead resisted neither his aid nor his touch. Come on, let's get you help. Yoshimaru's words from long ago came back to him. Help. This pain can be healed, but you cannot help me. The blonde grinned. Watch me, but let's do this one step at a time. Quote. With some effort, Naruto managed to get the Ikibi Jinchuriki to the prostrate blonde woman Jiraiya had instructed him to protect, dropping the Suna Nin beside her. Her honey eyes were locked in a vacant stare, and she didn't react to the presence of the two demon containers. Hey, Tsunade, right. I need you to heal Gaara. She remained unresponsive, and Naruto opened his mouth to try again, but lost his train of thought when Shizune suddenly landed in a heap beside them with a groan. Well, only one line of defense left. He looked up to find Kabuto bearing down on them, a wicked grin on his face. Tsunade, you've gotta help Gaara and Shizune. Please. They need you. Kabuto's chakra-coated hand speared towards him. For a second, Naruto saw Roshi's purple-sleeved arm extending towards him in a strike, and his body reacted by ducking beneath the limb. Now within the older shinobi's guard, Naruto punched his stomach and then slid around his back and shoved a kunai into his side. The blonde paused for a moment to catch his breath, the exhilaration of successfully applying Roshi's training in a real fight overwhelming him. Then Kabuto spun around and kicked him in the side, sending him skidding across the ground. Damn it, Naruto cursed. Stupid. He could hear Roshi berating him for his lack of awareness, especially in the middle of a fight. Doubly so since he was in over his head. Again. You've got some talent, Kabuto said. His voice was nonchalant, carrying an undertone of detached curiosity. It's strange that I haven't seen you before. You see, I've infiltrated every Chunin exam for the last 8 years, which is how I know about Gaara-kun. And Konoha has a habit of showing off its prominent genin, which the skills you've shown so far suggest you to be. He plucked the kunai from his side and spun it around in his hand. Naruto's attention was drawn to the wound he'd created, blue eyes widening as it closed before his eyes. And yet you weren't in the Chunin exams, and you wear no Hite 8. It's quite the mystery. The sunlight glinted off his glasses, and combined with the smirk, Naruto was reminded of a mad scientist he'd seen in a movie once. I quite enjoy a good mystery. He disappeared, and Naruto only had a moment to blink before pain lanced through his left arm. Ah, I've severed the muscles and ligaments in your arm. Kabuto's tone was clinical, as if he hadn't just caused a spike of agony with nothing more than a simple swip. Of his hand. Naruto's right hand the opposite bicep in a vain effort to stem the pain, trying to hold on to an injury that had no external evidence. Now, what will you do next? Naruto grit his teeth against the pain, shooting a glance backwards at the people he'd been assigned to protect. Tsunade still appeared catatonic, and Shizune and Gaara remained unmoved from where he'd left them, although the redhead appeared to be flexing one hand experimentally. Damn it, he released his hold on his arm and forced his body into the best approximation of a defensive stance he could manage. Kabuto seemed to take the blonde's form as an invitation, and he blazed forward with hands aglow. Naruto couldn't even track the enemy's movements, choosing instead to blindly leverage his shorter stature by bending low to avoid the strike. He tried to sweep the older male's feet, but Kabuto jumped to avoid it and landed on his hands behind the blonde, grabbing for the Jinchuriki's ankle with one hand. Naruto planted the palm of his good hand and leveraged his lower body into the air, performing an awkward one-handed handstand. He stayed there for a moment, motionless and focused, and his chakra flowed into the earth and erected a 4-foot wall between them. Then he righted himself and rushed over to Tsunade. Hey, what's the matter with you? We need your help. Why aren't you doing anything? Aren't you a Sannin? Tsunade has a crippling fear of blood. Kabuto's voice lilted over with a casual superiority that made Naruto feel like ice had been poured down his spine. The gray-haired male tutted. How any self-respecting Iryo nin could be incapacitated so easily, it's just disgraceful. Shut up, Naruto yelled. You don't know anything about what she's been through. He turned back to Tsunade, blue eyes wide and beseeching. I don't know what's wrong, but you've gotta help us so we can help you. Jiraiya said you're gonna be the next Hokage, and the Hokage protects his people. Nearby, Gaara's brow furrowed at the blonde's passionate plea, teal eyes flickering between Jinchuriki and Sannin. That's why I'm gonna fight to protect you, because I'm gonna be Hokage someday, believe it. Quote. Tsunade's hollow honey eyes rose to see the blonde for the first time, a vaguely familiar expression in her gaze. Naruto wondered why he recognized it, but was pulled from his musing by a slow, repeated clap before he could place it. Such a moving speech, Kabuto offered sarcastically. But really, did you expect that to accomplish anything? It takes more than cheerleading to move past the traumas Tsunade has been through. I know that. Naruto shot back. He couldn't tell if the reason his body was shaking was anger, fear, or indignation. People have hated me my whole life. I've always been alone and sad. It was the first time he'd ever voiced aloud, to an audience no less, that his life had been depressing, and it felt liberati. In a way, the burden of carrying that undisclosed misery around for so many years finally given wings to fly free. But I never gave up on trying to be better. To feel better. And eventually I found people who wanted to be around me. They helped me feel like I was important, and now it's like what life was like before doesn't matter, because they're here now. When you find people that give you purpose, that's when you become strong. Quote. Tsunade's haunted look suddenly made sense. It was the same way Utakata would look at him and see Yagura. The brunette had described it once as seeing the specter of the Mizukage looming where Naruto stood, and that the image was chilling, a stark reminder of what he'd lost. But also what he was fighting for. Knowing what he did now about the pair's friendship and the imminent threat that had driven the Kiri-nin to leave his home, he now understood Utakata's emotional state, and by association, he understood Tsunade's, just a little bit. He steeled himself back in a defensive position in front of the Sannin. I'm strong enough to beat you. Bring it on. Kabuto smirked. If you insist. He darted forward with another burst of speed, and Naruto used his righteous anger to produce a slew of great fireballs to impede the other males. Progress. The purple-clad shinobi swerved through each burst of flames, and Naruto found he couldn't change tactics fast enough to avoid the hand aimed at his chest. Shit. The medic's hand slammed into a small shield of sand that coalesced in front of the blonde's heart. Kabuto straightened from his attack, a questioning hum on his lips. Gaara-kun, how very unusual of you to defend someone else. Such vivacity, I can't say I expected you to interfere any further. Naruto shot a surprised look at the redhead, whose hand was extended toward him. His face was void of expression, and the blonde didn't think he looked any different than usual, but his actions felt strange, even taking into account that Jiraiya had asked for his help. Gaara, I desire to face strong opponents, Gaara said, to prove my own strength. His brow furrowed. Until recently, I was undefeated. Uchiha Sasuke, Naruto, I wish to understand where their strength comes from, what allows them to have achieved what others could not. My own mind came from solitude, but that was insufficient. If finding someone who gives you purpose truly gives you strength, then I will protect these people to grow strong. Sand poured out of the gourd on his back and reached for the older shinobi. Kabuto was forced to retreat as Naruto went over to the Ikibi Jinchuriki. You saved me. Gaara grunted, apparently done with any more long-winded proclamations. We have a mission. Yeah, right. Well, came Kabuto's smooth voice, it seems you have me outnumbered. I suppose I should even the odds. Shakan no Jutsu. From within a scroll in his hand emerged a pale human body, its limbs and neck hanging awkwardly, like a puppet with slack strings. It shambled towards the pair with surprising speed, fingers twisting through seals. Sand spread out to catch the person, but the earth between their feet rumbled and then split, and Gaara's broken concentration was evident in the way the silica collapsed. Naruto quickly stabilized himself, used to how Roshi had started to alter the terrain in their training, and caught the blade wielding arm that was poised to stab Gaara through the eye. He pulled the arm down and brought his knee up into the man's face, crushing his nose with a sickening crunch of cartilage. The man's head snapped backwards and he fell with the motion, and the blonde breathed a sigh of relief. But then the head straightened with a sort of forced jerk, and where blood should have been spewing from his broken nose, his face was clean. Wah! Globules of mud spewed from the man's mouth, and Naruto was too stunned by the development to react. Sand rose around him to absorb the incoming balls of earth, then shot forward, wrapped around the man's head, and compacted. Naruto turned wide blue eyes to Gaara, whose arm was again outstretched in his direction, hand in a fist. That was. Look. Kabuto was within feet of Tsunade, arm extended in a killing blow. Naruto's mouth opened. To yell for her to move, to cast a jutsu, to do something as he saw his mission come to an unfortunate end, and moved towards the Sannin even while he knew it was fruitless. Then Tsunade stood and punched Kabuto so hard in the stomach that the man's body seemed to fold around her fist. Naruto gasped in awe, and in that breath, the power of the blonde woman's punch sent the silver-haired shinobi rocketing backwards. She appeared to crack her knuckles before announcing in a strong voice, "A medic helps the weak. Protects them. And so does the Hokage. With me in charge, there'll be no more senseless deaths. And as my first official act, I'm gonna kick your ass." Quote. The Sannin brought her hand to her mouth before flipping through seals and slamming her palms on the ground. Kuchio's no jutsu, a massive white slug, easily as large as the Aikibi had been, appeared beneath the woman. The gastropod spewed a greenish liquid out of its mouth that ate into the skin of the fire-blinded snake Kabuto had summoned. It thrashed around as its body dissolved, letting out a loud, sibilant shriek as the purple-clad shinobi retreated back to where Jiraiya and Orochimaru were exchanging blows. Atop the second summoned serpent, an oblong, white object roughly the size of an adult formed next to where Tsunade was standing atop the giant slug's head. It appeared to glide down the creature's back until it dropped to the earth behind the gastropod's body. "Hey, you two," Tsunade shouted. "Watch over Shizune until I get back. That's an order. Katsuyu, let's do this." Naruto watched the Sannin charge into battle on her summons, awe displayed on his face. Where before Tsunade had seemed small and pathetic, in a way, nothing like what he would have expected from the next Hokage, she was now strong, decisive, and commanding, the epitome of leadership. He felt inspired. Despite his wish to be Hokage, he'd never seen one in action before, and now that he was finally able to witness one's true potential, it only made him covet the position more. "She's awesome. Should we not be moving?" Gaara's monotone question drew him from his reverie. Yeah, right." The redhead followed him as he rushed over to where Tsunade had directed them, finding a smaller version of the giant slug the Sannin had called Katsuyu on top of the unconscious Shizune. Short eye stalks turned to spy the two Jinchuriki as they approached. "If you place your hand on me, I can use Tsunade-sama's chakra to heal your injuries," she said in a musical voice. Naruto turned to Gaara to see what the redhead thought and was greeted by the other boy's usual stoicism. Shrugging, because the likelihood that Tsunade had summoned a creature that would hurt them seemed unlikely, he placed his mobile hand against the gastropod and heaved an immediate sigh of relief as soothing chakra flowed through his body. In short order, the pain that had crippled his lame arm was gone, and he windmilled the limb experimentally. "That feels great, thanks." He noticed Gaara lingering just out of his periphery, and finding the redhead's arm to still be hanging limply by his side, gestured for him to approach. "Come here, Gaara, she'll heal you up good as new." A flash of hesitation crossed the redhead's features and then disappeared. "I have not been healed before. All you gotta do is ask. Come on." She already offered and everything. Quote. With noticeable reticence, the Suna-nin stepped forward and slowly lifted a hand to the creature's slimy skin. The confused furrow of his eyebrows spoke volumes to his lack of understanding of the situation. After several seconds had passed, he opened his mouth, closed it, and then opened it again to admit, "People do not help me. They didn't help me, either, but that's all changed since I met Utakata-ni and Roshi-oji. They'll help you, I'm sure of it. And I'm here to help you whenever you need it, believe it." Gaara stared at him for a long while, and for once, Naruto didn't feel like fidgeting beneath his intensity. Where before there had been a sort of hunger to the redhead's gaze, now it just seemed placid. Maybe not at peace, but studious, as if the blonde were a strange curio the Sunanin was finally starting to figure out. So you're the brat Jiraiya won't shut up about. Naruto whirled on the spot to find the pair of Sannin approaching them, Jiraiya cradling his ribs with one hand. Tsunade's face looked haggard, lined with slight wrinkles that hadn't been there earlier, but her honey-colored eyes were stern, and her arms were crossed over her ample bosom. Now that he was up close to her, and not in the midst of battle, her presence was imposing. Where Jiraiya was easygoing, borderline irresponsible, Tsunade was all business, her tone brusque and unamused, and the blonde felt an immediate respect for her. She's like Roshi Oji, yeah, Jiraiya trained you for sure, she commented dryly. You're as eloquent as he is. It's only been a month. The pair shouted simultaneously. Grumpily, the blonde muttered, and he's barely done anything. Quote, Tsunade waved a dismissive hand in the air. Whatever. Her features softened, just a little, and with a touch of genuine gratitude, she said, thank you for protecting Shizune and me from Orochimaru's lackey. It takes guts to stand up to someone that far above your skill level and keep fighting. Oh, well, no problem. Uzumaki Naruto keeps his promises. But, where'd they go? Crawled back to whatever hole they came out of, Jiraiya answered. That's not the last we'll see of them, I guarantee it. We'll deal with them in due time, Tsunade asserted. Meanwhile, I'm more curious about you. She took a step towards Naruto, stern expression back in place, and the same sliver of fear that had gripped the blonde during the early months of tea. Reigning with Roshi rolled down his spine. See, I've known Jiraiya for a very, very long time. He's got a lot of skills, including Kaden and Doden, but he's never specialized in defensive jutsu. Flashy, that's his style. And as loath as I am to admit it, Kabuto has a point. All active shinobi wear their hite-8 in some fashion. That kid's got his, she continued, thumbing at Gaara, where the hourglass insignia of the hidden sand was inscribed on a metal plate sewn to the strap of his gourd. Hell, even Jiraiya's got his stupid thing. The white-haired Sannin blustered at her choice of words, but she spoke over him. And for someone who wants to be Hokage, that sort of pride is tantamount. She grabbed the green jacket that they'd dropped on the ground upon arriving, reached into the pocket, withdrew a leaf forehead protector, and tied it in place around her head. Then she leaned down so her face was in the blonde's, and Naruto gulped at the proximity, the Sannin's authority and Nirin. Weighty presence. If Jiraiya's barely taught you anything in a month, someone else has been teaching a kid who isn't even a genin some pretty interesting skills. So, as your new Hokage, I'm ordering you to tell me who's been training you. Who are, Utakata ni, and, Roshi Oji.